December 16, 2000. A husband leaves home before sunrise. He plans to spend a few hours duck hunting before returning to celebrate his wedding anniversary. He never comes back. At first, the explanation seems simple. A boating accident, a drowning, maybe even an alligator attack. But there is one problem. Nothing about the scene makes sense. His boat is found. His truck is found. His hunting gear is found. Yet somehow the man himself has vanished. No body, no blood, no witnesses, no answers. For years, authorities insist it was a tragic accident. But one person refuses to accept that conclusion. His mother. While investigators move on, she spends nearly 2 decades fighting to prove her son was murdered. What she eventually uncovers reveals a betrayal so extreme that even seasoned investigators struggle to comprehend it. A betrayal involving a trusted best friend. A secret affair. Millions of pounds worth of insurance. And a murder plot hidden behind a perfect Christian family image. This is the story of Michael Williams. And the conspiracy that nearly got away with murder. Michael Williams seemed to have everything. Friends described him as dependable, hardworking, generous. The type of person who would stop whatever he was doing to help someone else. He lived near Tallahassee, Florida, with his wife Denise and their young daughter. Family was everything to him. His favorite escape from work was duck hunting. He had loved it since childhood. It was peaceful, predictable, and usually done with close friends. One of those friends was Brian Winchester. The two had known each other since high school. They were more than friends. They were practically family. Their wives were close. Their children spent time together. The couples vacationed together. Nobody looking from the outside would have suspected anything unusual. But beneath that image, dangerous secrets were already forming. And by December 2000, those secrets were about to turn deadly. Before daylight on December 16th, Michael left for Lake Seminole. The lake stretched across thousands of acres. Dense vegetation, submerged tree stumps, remote coves, the perfect hunting location. Hours passed, then more hours. By midday, Denise became concerned. Michael should have been home, that he knew they had plans. When he still hadn't returned, family members began calling around. Soon a search operation was launched. What investigators found only deepened the mystery. Michael's vehicle sat abandoned near a boat ramp. His boat was eventually discovered floating in a secluded area of the lake. Inside were items that immediately caught investigators' attention. His shotgun remained in its case. Life jackets were still on board. Decoys were untouched. The scene didn't look like an active hunting trip. It looked as though something had interrupted it before it even began. And that raised an unsettling question. What happened before Michael ever had the chance to hunt? Lake Seminole was dangerous. Hidden stumps sat just below the surface. Boaters occasionally struck them. So investigators initially considered a simple explanation. Maybe Michael hit a stump. Maybe he fell overboard. Maybe his waders filled with water and dragged him under. It sounded plausible, until experts examined the evidence. The boat's fuel tank was almost full, meaning it had barely been operated. Then investigators inspected the propeller. If the boat had struck a submerged stump, traces of wood should have been present. There were none. No impact evidence. No collision damage. No indication of an accident. The theory began falling apart. Search teams intensified efforts. Boats, helicopters, divers. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Still nothing. Michael Williams had seemingly vanished from existence. Then came a discovery that made the mystery even stranger. For more than 16 years, Cheryl Williams had heard the same explanations. Michael drowned. Michael was lost in the lake. Michael was eaten by alligators. Authorities repeated those theories so often that many people accepted them as fact. But Cheryl never did. Now, at long last, investigators were about to learn whether she had been right all along. After agreeing to cooperate, Brian Winchester provided detectives with information they had sought for nearly 2 decades. Most importantly, he told them where to find Michael. The location was nowhere near Lake Seminole. Not in the water. Not hidden beneath the lake's surface. Not in some remote swamp. Instead, investigators were directed to a secluded area in Leon County, only a few miles from property connected to Brian's family. It was a place that had never been searched during the original investigation. For years, search teams had focused on the wrong location. because the crime scene everyone believed in never actually existed. Investigators arrived at the site and began excavating. Soon, they found exactly what Brian had described. Human remains, the remains of Michael Williams. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation. For 16 years, officials had maintained that Michael died in the lake. Now, the simple fact that his body had been buried on land destroyed that entire narrative. Every accident theory collapsed instantly. Every alligator theory collapsed instantly. Every explanation that relied on Michael entering the lake as a victim of misfortune was exposed as false. The mother who had spent years being dismissed had been right. And everyone knew it. For Cheryl Williams, the moment was bittersweet. She had spent nearly 2 decades searching for her son. Now she had finally found him. But she had also learned the horrifying truth about how he died. The trusted friend, the betrayal, the conspiracy, the years of lies. Nothing could undo that. Still, Michael was finally coming home, and investigators were finally in a position to seek justice. The next step came quickly. Based on Brian's confession and the evidence gathered during the renewed investigation, authorities moved against Denise Williams. For years, she had publicly portrayed herself as a grieving widow. Now prosecutors alleged she had been a participant in a murder conspiracy. In May 2018, Denise was arrested. The news stunned the community. Many people had watched her rebuild her life after Michael's disappearance. Many had believed her. Now she stood accused of helping plan the death of her husband. The charges were severe. First-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, accessory after the fact. Suddenly, one of Florida's most baffling missing person cases had transformed into a full-scale murder prosecution, and at the center of it all stood 2 former lovers, Brian Winchester and Denise Williams. The people who had spent years insisting they knew nothing. As preparations for trial began, prosecutors faced a difficult challenge. There was no crime scene preserved from 2000. There was no fresh forensic evidence from the lake. The case depended heavily on testimony, especially from one witness, Brian Winchester, the man who had confessed to killing Michael, the man who had already admitted his role, the man whose credibility would become one of the biggest battles of the trial. Because the defense had an obvious argument. Why should anyone trust a confessed killer? And that question would soon dominate the courtroom. But prosecutors believed they had something stronger than Brian's testimony alone. They had years of suspicious behavior, financial motives, witness statements, the affair, the insurance policies, the marriage that followed Michael's disappearance. And most importantly, they now had proof that Michael never died in Lake Seminole. The story that had protected the conspirators for 16 years had finally collapsed. Now a jury would decide what happened next. And before the trial ended, the courtroom would hear revelations so disturbing that many observers struggled to believe they were real, including evidence suggesting that the secret relationship between Brian and Denise had been even deeper than investigators initially realized. The conspiracy was about to be laid bare, and Cheryl Williams would finally get the opportunity she had waited nearly 17 years for. The opportunity to look the people responsible for her son's death in the eye as justice caught up with them. When Denise Williams entered the courtroom in late 2018, prosecutors believed they finally had what had been missing for nearly 2 decades. Not just a theory, not just suspicions, a complete story. A story built from confessions, financial records, witness testimony, and years of hidden relationships. The challenge now was convincing a jury. Because despite everything investigators had uncovered, there remained one major obstacle. The prosecution's star witness was Brian Winchester, a confessed killer, a man who had admitted to participating in the conspiracy, a man who had every reason to minimize his own responsibility. The defense immediately attacked his credibility. They argued that Brian was attempting to save himself, that he had struck a deal, that his testimony could not be trusted. The prosecution expected that argument. They knew Brian alone would never be enough. So they began constructing a much larger picture, piece by piece, witness by witness, document by document. The jury heard about the secret affair, an affair that prosecutors argued had begun years before Michael's death. They heard how Brian and Denise had grown increasingly determined to be together. They heard about concerns regarding divorce, concerns about public image, concerns about custody of Michael and Denise's daughter, concerns about finances. Then prosecutors introduced evidence showing how quickly events unfolded after Michael's disappearance. Life insurance claims were filed. The accidental drowning narrative was accepted. The investigation stalled. And eventually Denise married Brian. Prosecutors argued that the sequence was impossible to ignore. The defense disagreed. They claimed the state was connecting unrelated events to create a conspiracy that never existed. But prosecutors had more. Much more. As testimony continued, jurors learned details that painted a picture of deception stretching back years. Witnesses described relationships that were far closer than they had publicly appeared. Friends recalled unusual behavior. Family members described growing suspicions. And investigators explained how critical evidence from the lake never matched the official accident theory. The mysterious appearance of the waders. The hunting jacket. The license that somehow survived months underwater. Each detail strengthened the prosecution's claim that Michael's disappearance had been staged from the beginning. Then came some of the most emotional testimony of the trial. Michael's mother, Cheryl Williams. For years she had fought almost entirely alone. Now she finally had the chance to speak before the court. Jurors listened as she described the endless search for answers. The flyers, the billboards, the letters, the demonstrations, the ridicule, the frustration of being told over and over again that her son's death was simply an accident. She described how authorities dismissed her concerns, how people questioned her persistence, how she was made to feel unreasonable for refusing to accept explanations that never made sense. The courtroom fell silent, because everyone now knew something Cheryl had known from the very beginning. Michael Williams had been murdered, and if she had stopped fighting, the truth might never have emerged. As the trial moved toward its conclusion, prosecutors focused on motive. They argued that this was not a spontaneous act, not an accident, not a misunderstanding. It was a calculated conspiracy driven by desire, secrecy, and self-interest. According to the state, Michael had become an obstacle standing between two people and the future they wanted. The defense urged jurors to reject that narrative. They argued that Brian Winchester was manipulating the situation, that his testimony was unreliable, that the state could not prove Denise had actively participated in the murder itself. The jury now faced a difficult decision. Months of testimony, years of secrets, thousands of pages of evidence, and one central question. Was Denise Williams a victim of Brian Winchester's lies, or had she helped create the conspiracy that ended Michael's life? After deliberating for hours, the jury returned. The courtroom grew tense. Everyone understood the significance of the moment. 17 years after Michael disappeared, justice was finally within reach. Then the verdict was read. Guilty. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. Guilty of accessory after the fact. The prosecution had won. For Cheryl Williams, the moment represented nearly 2 decades of relentless determination. For the first time since 2000, the people responsible for her son's death were being held accountable. But the legal battle was not quite over. Because while the verdict brought relief, appeals would soon challenge parts of the conviction. And even as sentences were handed down, one heartbreaking consequence of the conspiracy remained. A daughter had grown up without her father, raised for years by the very people prosecutors said had orchestrated his death. The final chapter of this story would not be about courtrooms. It would be about loss, the devastating human cost of betrayal, and the extraordinary determination of a mother who refused to let her son be forgotten. When the verdict was announced, many people believed the story was finally over. After nearly 18 years, Michael Williams had been found. The truth had been uncovered. The people responsible had been convicted, and the family had finally received answers. But the legal system rarely moves in a straight line. Even after the guilty verdicts, another battle was waiting, one that would once again place the case under intense scrutiny. Following her conviction, Denise Williams appealed. Her attorneys argued that the evidence supporting the first-degree murder conviction was insufficient. Specifically, they challenged whether prosecutors had proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Denise actively participated in the killing itself. The appeal moved through the courts. Then, in 2020, a major decision was handed down. The appellate court overturned Denise's first-degree murder conviction. The ruling did not declare her innocent, nor did it suggest that the conspiracy never existed. Instead, the court concluded that prosecutors had failed to establish the legal requirements necessary to uphold the murder conviction. However, the court reached a different conclusion regarding the conspiracy charge. That conviction remained intact. The judges found sufficient evidence to support the finding that Denise had participated in a conspiracy to murder Michael Williams. As a result, she continued serving a lengthy prison sentence. The decision created mixed reactions. Some people viewed it as a setback. Others focused on what remained unchanged. The courts had still concluded that a conspiracy existed. The official narrative of an accidental drowning had been permanently destroyed. The truth about Michael's disappearance was no longer in dispute. And perhaps most importantly, Michael's family finally knew what had happened. Meanwhile, Brian Winchester remained in prison for the crimes connected to the kidnapping that ultimately exposed the entire conspiracy. Ironically, the act intended to preserve years of secrets became the very thing that destroyed them. Had Brian never climbed into Denise's vehicle in 2016, the truth might have remained buried forever. It is one of the most remarkable twists in modern true crime history. A murder concealed for 16 years, then exposed not by forensic technology, not by a witness, not by a hidden document, but by a completely separate crime committed by one of the conspirators himself. For investigators, the case became a powerful lesson. Sometimes the smallest crack can collapse an entire wall of deception. And in this case, once the first crack appeared, everything came crashing down. But beyond the investigations, the court proceedings, and the headlines, there was a much deeper tragedy. The daughter lost her father before she was old enough to understand what had happened. A family lost a son. A brother lost his best friend. And a community lost a man remembered for his kindness and generosity. Yet no one carried the burden more heavily than Cheryl Williams. For nearly 2 decades, she refused to surrender. When authorities closed the case, she kept fighting. When experts dismissed her concerns, she kept fighting. When people called her unreasonable, she kept fighting. When government offices ignored her letters, she kept fighting. Most people would have given up. She never did. Year after year, she carried Michael's photograph. Year after year, she demanded answers. Year after year, she insisted that something was wrong. And year after year, she stood almost completely alone. Until finally, the evidence proved she had been right all along. In many ways, this is not just the story of Michael Williams. It is the story of a mother's determination. A reminder that persistence can succeed where institutions fail. A reminder that unanswered questions should not be ignored simply because they are difficult. And a reminder that truth has a way of resurfacing, even after years of being buried. Because for 16 years, a carefully crafted lie convinced people that Michael Williams disappeared in a tragic hunting accident. For 16 years, the real story remained hidden beneath layers of deception. But lies require constant protection. Truth only requires time. Eventually, the truth caught up with everyone involved. And when it did, it revealed one of the most shocking betrayals imaginable. A husband betrayed by the people he trusted most. A father taken from his daughter. A friend murdered by his closest companion. And a mother who refused to let the world forget. Today, Michael Williams is remembered not for the way he died, but for the life that was stolen from him. A life defined by hard work, devotion to family, loyalty to friends, and dreams that were never given the chance to continue. His story remains one of Florida's most extraordinary criminal cases. Not because of the conspiracy, not because of the insurance money, not even because of the years of deception, but because one mother's relentless pursuit of justice succeeded when nearly everyone else had stopped looking. And without Cheryl Williams, the truth might still be buried today. ####, closing message. Thank you for watching Crime Vault. Cases like the Michael Williams case remind us that the truth can stay hidden for years, but it can never stay buried forever. Behind every cold case is a real person, a real family, and loved ones still searching for answers. If this story moved you, please take a moment to support the channel by liking this video, subscribing to Crime Vault, and turning on notifications so you never miss an investigation. Every week, We bring you some of the most shocking true crime cases, cold case breakthroughs, criminal investigations, forensic discoveries, and untold stories from around the world. From decades-old mysteries to modern investigations, we'll continue uncovering the facts and following each case far beyond the headlines. We have many more powerful true crime documentaries coming soon. And trust us, some of the upcoming cases are even more unbelievable than the one you've just heard. Before you go, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe justice was fully served in the Michael Williams case? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and thank you for being part of the Crime Vault community.